Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maureen O'Connor from Quilters Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. Today's episode, number 107, is again how to choose a pattern to use your scraps or what you have in your stash. But before we get to that, I'd like to give a shout out to Sue from Asheville, North Carolina, for thanking her for her lovely thank you note to me. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much. I also got a comment regarding the same subject of using your stash, and I showed a quilt called Lemon Blush, and this commenter, Nana Kathy, thank you for your comment, pointed out that there's waste in this pattern. Let me show you what I do to eliminate the waste. In the pattern, they have you make your braid, and then the edges get cut off. And that's all waste. And if you've watched my channel for any length of time, you know I hate waste. So how do you eliminate the waste in this? This is how I make that pattern, and I failed to say it when I brought this up a couple of episodes ago. I grabbed my easy angle ruler. You can grab whatever right triangle ruler you have. It's got to have the 90-degree angle and the 45 here. And I take my strip, and I've marked on here where this ruler meets the bottom of the strip. And I put that on there, and that measurement from here to here is the 6 inches that's called for in the pattern. But rather than cut here and then waste all this, I cut with the angle on it. Now this side has to come off, so let me pull it down a little bit so I can reach it. So that's the only time you have to get this side. Then after you get this one cut, you take it to the upside down, line it up, and cut here. Now you do have to have your strip either wrong sides together or right sides together, because you do need rights and lefts for this. But they have you start with the triangle, and then your first piece would go here. Oh, not here. It has to be this one. Yeah. So this would get sewn on here. The next one would get sewn on here, and so on and so forth till you get your whole braid, and you don't have any waste here because you've already cut them off. You may have a small trim, but it would be certainly very, very minimal. But thank you, Nana Kathy, for pointing that out. We definitely like to make patterns without waste. Now, let's get to the episode. This quilt behind me here is the inspiration for this episode. If you recall, when we talked about what patterns are good to use scraps on, I looked for several different things. One was, does it use the cuts that you have? How much extra fabric, if any, do you need to buy? And the ease of construction of the quilt. In this quilt, this pattern is from the Big Book of Stars quilts. As I was quilting on the long arm, I kept looking at it and saying, wow, there is an awful lot of background in this. And when I asked Linda, who made it, about the background fabric, she said she bought 4 yards of fabric. That alone, to me, would knock it out of contention. Now, I like Sawtooth Stars a lot, so I do like the quilt. It's a little busy with all, 8 different star points, but it did use what she had. She used, for these, 2.5-inch squares, and here is a 4.5-inch square, which she had a pile of 5-inch squares, which she cut down. Of course, I never like to do that. If I'm going to use 4.5-inch squares, I want to cut 4.5-inch squares, not cut a 1/2 inch off 5. But at any rate, this is what she made. And the other thing I would point out on this is when you're pulling your scraps to use a quilt like this, make sure you have enough contrast with the background fabric. You can really see this one. You can really see this. You can see the yellow. There's some that disappear. This one disappears. There's a star point over here that this star point disappears. If I had this pile of scraps, while I like the quilt, I would not make this to use up the scraps. You use more background, in my opinion, than you did of the scraps. I would choose something like this. This is my Better Than Crumbs pattern, and we'll have the link in the description. Don't get confused. The one that says Better Than Crumbs has this pattern in it. The cover quilt is a different version. It has a lot of white in it, but it's the same block, hence they're in the same pattern. If I had a bunch of 5-inch squares, you can cut the 5-inch squares into 1.5 by 2.5-inch pieces to get these pieces. This pretty burgundy, rusty burgundy color she uses for background here, this is much, much less used. There's much more scraps in this versus the background. Hence, I would make something like this with these scraps. Now, I said I like the quilt. I like Sawtooth Stars. So as I'm sitting at the long arm working on this, I'm thinking, what can I make with Sawtooth Stars? Well, I say, what do I have? So let me get the bulletin board up and I will show you. We have boxes of fat quarter pieces that I wanted to turn into my Sawtooth Stars. So I pulled out these CAF pieces and said, I'd like to use these. So I next say, what do I need to make each block? And in Linda's pattern, in Linda's pattern, she made an 8-inch block and a 4-inch block. And I got to get my notes here so I don't say something wrong. So there's a 8-inch star and a 4-inch star. And in the big star, you need, in your print, a 4.5-inch square. That's the one that Linda started at 5 and cut down to 4.5. And you need 4 3-inch squares for your star points. And in the background fabric, you need, for the flying geese, the big background square, that's the quarter square triangles, is 5.5 inches. And you need 4 2.5-inch cut for the corner squares. In the small star, the print center is 2.5 inches and the star points start at 2 inches. And the background, the big square for the flying geese, is 3.5 inches, and these are cut 1.5 to finish to 1 to get your small. Now I started making these like this with all the same fabric here. And then I saw a Edita Sitar picture on Instagram where she had a jacket made with a smaller Sawtooth Star is the center of a bigger Sawtooth Star. So I decided I wanted to experiment with that. And that's how I got these two blocks here. So I have not yet figured out how I'm going to lay them out. This is my starting point. I keep drawing pictures and trying to figure it out, but I'm just going to make all the blocks and then lay it out and figure it out. I have to figure out what I could get out of each fat quarter. And after doing the math, I found from each fat quarter I could get 5 big Sawtooth Stars. And I didn't want to use the big cave prints to make the small stars because these pieces are so tiny you wouldn't even be able to see the print in these star points. So I decided I wanted to use the Aboriginal Dots fabrics. And then I needed a background. Well, I don't want to purchase a background. That's one of the keys to using your scraps, is to use your scraps for both the prints and the backgrounds. And at first, I pulled out this stack. I found this stack of 10-inch squares of neutrals. And I thought, oh, I want to use that. But after I did the math on this, I found that I wasn't going to be able to make good use of it and get enough pieces from it to make the pieces I needed for here. So I pulled out a piece and I said, you know what, this is a really big piece of background. So I decided to use this. I have not done the math on how much is here. My plan is to make as many big Sawtooth Stars as this fabric will make, and then I stop. So that means I'm not going to go through and cut up all of these. I'll cut 1 or 2 at a time, make the pieces, and then keep going until I run out of here, so that I don't end up with pieces cut for Sawtooth Stars with no background fabric. You want to, think about what you have and not make more waste and more trouble for yourself. So when I decided to go to making the Sawtooth Stars, the little ones, with these, I went back to my 10-inch squares and said that would be perfect. So what I did, and you're probably all going to think I'm crazy, is I took one of them, and this is the friction pen, so this will come off with an iron. I drew the pieces on here so that I could see how many blocks from here I could get. I can get 3 per 10-inch square. There's some left over. I decided to just go ahead and cut those into 1.5-inch strips, what was left, or I should say pieces, because they're not very long, and they're in a baggie that will then go into the 1.5-inch piece box, which will end up in, guess which quilt? The world's greatest scrap quilt. It will be the 4-inch block version. But I'm not going to waste anything that's bigger than 1.5 by 1.5, and anything smaller than that can get put in the dog bed bag. So I think this is a really good example of taking a quilt that you like and making it into something that fits your parameters. I want to have little waste. I want to have little additional fabric needed. I want to use what I have, and I want fairly easy construction. And I think this will meet the bill once I figure out what layout I want to do. But don't be afraid to look at a quilt and say, I like it, but I don't want to make it that way. You can always look at a quilt and say, I like it, but I'm going to make it using what I have, not what the other quilter had. So that's today's episode. Please like, share, and subscribe. And thank you to all of you who have purchased the World's Greatest Scrap Quilt pattern. I'd love to see some of the pictures of them. You can send pictures to my email address, quilters7inc@gmail.com. And please keep the comments coming, because you all catch me in things that I forgot to say. That's the episode. Until next time, happy sewing.